Hello, everybody. It's Friday, June 5th, and welcome to today's talk, The Art of Transformation Beyond Control. Today's going to be a little bit different than our usual talks, and this will be a test run of a TEDx talk that our longtime member, Pete Anderson from US Bank, is practicing for us. Thanks for being here to give him your support. This talk will focus on his professional learnings from two Fortune 125 transformation efforts, and we'll let him get into the bulk of the information here in a moment, but real quick before we get started, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. First, today's webinar will be available after the live session, particularly for Pete to watch and rewatch again. What's that?
It's a great hobby.
Yeah, great hobby. But if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to add them to chat, and I'll keep an eye on those, Pete. Maybe pop them in throughout, but we'll also leave time at the end for any other questions. And as you do ask questions, please feel free to, or when you do put it in chat, make sure to send it to all panelists and attendees. And I think that's it. So without further, taking any more oxygen, I'll kick things over to you, Pete.
Cool.
Take it
away. I'll give you guys some additional context as well. So thank you for taking some time on a Friday. This will not take a full hour by any stretch. The talk that I have is supposed to be 18 minutes or less. I think it's grown over the last 3 times that I've done it, so it's probably closer to 20. And as much as Britt was incredibly kind in saying, provide questions, don't do it during, because in the TEDx environment, I won't have the opportunity to take any questions live. So by all means, jot them down. And this one is truly a different type of talk than I've ever done, in that it's trying to combine personal, professional, and a couple different types of personal things when it comes to life as an artist, life as a parent, etc. And really trying to look at transformation through all of those different themes. And so we'll see how it goes, and would love your questions, feedback at the tail end of it. We can talk about anything from any of the content. So whether it's professional stuff or not, it's fair game for the discussion. So. With that, just because I'm continuing to edit this and so on, some of this stuff I'm actually reading, so I'll do my best to not look like I'm Trump reading from a teleprompter, but we'll keep trucking from there. So let's get rolling. I learned almost everything I'd need to know about driving transformational change while hopped up on Mountain Dew and hunched over a potter's wheel in a ceramic studio in college. Transformation consists of taking the status quo, in this case a lump of clay, adding or subtracting elements. The process for this effort consists of making a piece of pottery on the wheel, pushing individual letters into the surface, trimming off excess clay to make the final form, firing the piece in a kiln, glazing it, and then firing it again. The ultimate result of any transformation is something that is essentially brand new. And that's basically what you see here. So if that's the basic definition of transformation, what are the behaviors that I learned while playing in the mud? I learned that consistent practice is the only way to hone your craft. I learned how to persevere through hundreds of flopped pots, AKA failure, and to learn lessons from every one of them. I learned that patiently experimenting and pursuing objective feedback from others that are more skilled than I am ultimately produce better results. Hence the activity here today. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that the process is not fully controllable. In the case of pottery, the kiln is the wild card. We only half-jokingly reference the kiln gods every time we closed the door and heated up a bunch of our work to over 2,000 degrees. If your piece got a little bit too hot or stayed a little too cool, had the tiniest of hairline fractures, or had too much or too little glaze, your piece could ultimately be destined for the scrap heap. Your artwork could easily end up looking very different than your original vision, or it may be flat out unusable. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, but that lack of control is the stuff of magic. This particular piece was made well after my college years. It represents about 15 years of practice. It's one of my favorites, not just because I feel as though it's a well-balanced work that met its purpose, but because it started as a lump of mud. I shaped it, decorated it by pushing in lead printing press letters one at a time into the surface for multiple hours, trimmed it, glazed it, gave it up to the kiln gods, and it turned out differently than I actually thought it would. The orange section on the top portion of this and the white section are actually the same glaze, just a different thickness. And the result actually emphasized the form better than my original vision would have. Sometimes the kiln gods know more than we do. It came out transformed. I played a big role, but I didn't have ultimate control. So let's fast forward for a bit. I've been helping 2 Fortune 125 companies change the way they work since about 2015. In the industry, they call it digital transformation. Same goals, status quo, add and subtract, result in something significantly changed. And from my point of view, something that's valuable and beautiful. An orchestra of thousands working in new ways that produce better outcomes and more engaging work environments. And the work itself is super simple, right? All you have to do is convince senior leaders to change how they fund all the technology work that the organization does, normally north of $1 billion. You got to reorganize the majority of the workforce. You need to politely invite about 1/3 of that workforce to leave the company and retool the folks that remain. You need to convince folks that are working from checklists that it's better to think for themselves in new ways of working. And you tell them all to collaborate better. And while you're doing that, make sure that the customer's at the center of everything that you do. Easy peasy, right? That's all we got to do. All the cool kids are doing it. And to prove that all the cool kids are doing it, we've got some data here for you. The International Data Corporation estimated that 40% of all technology spend in 2019 was associated with digital transformation, whopping $2 trillion. And I would assume that 2020 is actually going to be a higher dollar amount, with COVID driving a variety of digital transformation efforts in ways that we've never even thought of. Another 2019 study, this one from Deloitte, showed that 87% of respondents believed that their industries will be disrupted by digital technologies, and less than half of them felt ready for the challenge. And so with all this focus and all this money being spent, the success rate must be out of this world, right? In actuality, the numbers would suggest that while transformation concepts may seem pretty straightforward, they're anything but easy to implement. A couple other studies for you. 2017, Bain & Company surveyed over 1,000 companies in the midst of digital transformation. A mere 5% of them met or exceeded their expectations, and upwards of 75% settled for what they considered to be mediocre outcomes. And last but not least, McKinsey, a couple years later, did a similar survey. Only 3% of 1,733 respondents indicating that they met their goals, and only 14% of those indicating that they maintained their goals or sustained improvements over time with their digital transformation. So what's going on? We've got the high-level formula that we talked about earlier. We've got some finance stuff, some org stuff. We've got the financial resources to make it happen. We're spending $2 trillion. We've got leaders that have commanded the troops to make it so. So why are the vast majority of these transformations failing to reach their desired outcomes? Having talked to transformation specialists all over the country and having lived through 1.5 of my own, I've got a pretty strong hypothesis. In short, they're failing to engage the heads and the hearts of the folks that need to make all of these changes real. Virtually every transformation I've seen documented has started with a heavy focus on process, replacing one prescriptive checklist with another. And by glazing over the mindset shifts and the very real pain of change for folks charged with making the new vision a reality, every one of these transformation efforts are cutting themselves off at the knees. Change is about people, and those people need to understand a bunch of things about what lies ahead of them. They need to understand why the changes are necessary. They need to understand what they'll gain from the changes. They need to understand that their unique skills, passions, and ideas are all respected and absolutely critical for successful transformation. They need to know that their identity should be shaped by what they can learn in the future, not what they've learned so far. They need to help create and buy into a shared set of values. They need to be willing to practice and develop their individual crafts to the best of their abilities, which will require some flopped pots along the way. They need to know that this scary new world can be more rewarding than the perceived safety of the old world. And they need to be shown how to be resilient over time. They need to be okay with not being able to control the process. And they need to know that it's okay to hurt in the midst of really big change. My first experience with transformative change happened well before I joined the corporate workforce. I'm the short, beardless one standing on the railing on the left. The guy holding me back from jumping off that said railing is my dad. He's a good guy that did his best, but for a variety of reasons, he left a few years after this photo was taken. Don't worry, we all survived. Both my parents eventually went on to find new loves, and my brother and I ended up being somewhat decent citizens. I bring it up to draw a parallel. In this case, the status quo was a family unit. A full-time father was removed and replaced with a once-a-weekend outing for a Dunkin' Donut and some bowling. Donkeys are awesome, but they don't quite replace what was lost. What remained was something almost entirely new. New relationship dynamics, new stresses, new roles. I never asked for the family transformation I experienced. I didn't understand the why behind his departure. The only family operating model that I had ever known was completely obliterated, whether I liked it or not. And I was separated from the source of much of my tiny little identity. And the impacts of that transformation have been lasting. I think twice before I trust. I'm a bit of a skeptic when someone is selling me something. I hate not being in control. And to this day, I fear being abandoned along the way. Virtually everyone listening to this talk can relate to that sense of loss in some practical way. And it's not a big leap to say this is the same way that corporate transformation can feel for many. So just look at it through their eyes. Remember all those projects you've been recognized for over the past 20 years? I'm sorry to say you've actually been doing it wrong the whole time. Remember those relationships that you've built with your workmates? Sorry, 1 out of 3 of you needs to go, and you don't get to choose which ones get walked out the door. You didn't ask for this? Well, it's here and you have to deal with it. All of a sudden, these studies about digital transformation success rates feel both logical and accurate. I know the majority of you are thinking, Pete, I can't believe how cute you were as a kid. What happened? And my short answer is I can't control aging any more than I can control transformation. And at least one of you is ready to stop talking about personal stuff and it's like saying, dude, this is getting a little heavy. Can you tell me just how you'd prefer to lay out the foundation for a more successful way? So let's dive into that. Here's my take. Knowing that change is both simple and brutally difficult, I've spent the better part of 5 years creating, testing, and evolving a set of values and principles that I believe can support virtually any type of transformational change effort. They aren't perfect, and they won't transform any organization absent the other tactics I described earlier, but they've been used to unite hundreds of teams and thousands of people around changes that I sincerely never thought possible. As much as I was accountable to helping drive them, even I was a skeptic as to whether or not they could be done. And I'm pretty sure that their success starts because humility is at the center of those values, and it's at the center of all that we do. We need to assume that we are wrong until we're proven right. Doing so allows us to embrace new ideas and battle our innate biases. And without humility, we get married to our solutions instead of getting married to the problems that we're seeking to solve. Humility drives us to experiment quickly and to learn. Empathy, passion, and curiosity feed the head and the heart of transformational change. If we empathize with those we serve, as well as those we partner with to accomplish our goals, we'll approach change with balance. Without passion, we won't have the resiliency to survive the conflict that will invariably hit us out of the blue. And with it, we'll inspire those around us when they're struggling to find their footing. Curiosity drives us to learn, to find problems worth solving, to avoid falling back into old habits. But we can't deliver real change without action. So by defaulting to doing more than talking about doing, we're able to quickly apply our continuous learning. We're not just looking to increase our book knowledge here. We're looking to make an impact on the real world. I love the word kinship. Thank you to Collaborative Gain moderator Melissa Norcross for coining the phrase in this context. I love it possibly because it feels a little bit like something Bo and Luke would say on Dukes of Hazzard, but mostly because it implies family, a shared vision, and the pursuit of something bigger than ourselves. That kind of work is both engaging and fun. And if you don't have support and a sense of humor, it's highly unlikely that you can tackle something that is bigger than you can control. Meanwhile, we can't boil the ocean. A friend of mine, Felipe, says that focus isn't an F word. I love that thought. In order to drive significant change, you must focus on smaller parts of the bigger picture, just ruthlessly and without apology. It means you have to say no to some really important things at different points of the process. And it's hard, but it will ultimately enable you to accomplish more than if you attempted to do and be everything for everybody. Last but not least, trust. It's the surface, or I should say the foundation for all of it. Trusting each person to bring their unique skills to bear for the greater good, trusting that everyone's actions are rooted in positive intent, and trusting that the larger vision is worth the pain to achieve it. The trick is to ensure that these values are used to drive new behaviors. And that's where the magic happens and where the abstract ideas become real. The majority of my career was spent creating project plans that lay out the approach to build something. This is what those plans normally looked like before a transformation. They attempted to predict the future and make all of the work that we'll do over the next 12 to 18 months visible and normally super linear. Whatever the plan can't predict, it attempts to control with process. And those processes will suck the life out of just about any human being on the planet. Control is not one of our core values. And if you're delivering software or helping others change how they operate, don't create a plan like this. Instead, establish a destination, figure out the big rocks that you'll have to move, whether it be finance or org structure, et cetera. But approach the work to move each of those rocks with the values in mind. Something as simple as a now, next, future model can clearly articulate priority of your transformation without wasting time pretending you can predict exactly when each of the steps is going to happen. So let's bring our values back up and use them to drive some behavior changes or as a filter to figure out if we're behaving the way that we should be. For finance, let's try using some humility, curiosity, and our bias toward action to experiment with new ways of funding work. Maybe we could fund people instead of projects. We could probably do it quickly and at a small enough scope that we can avoid too much risk in the process. For learning, let's experiment with virtually all of the values to experiment with a variety of methods and mediums for training, knowing that some will be better than others and being humble enough to try creative stuff that might fail. For enterprise strategy, it could look like trusting those that are closest to the work to challenge strategies created by higher ups, while also narrowing our focus and to just a few absolutely critical items at a time. For change agents like myself, it looks like not assuming that what I've done before is the right thing now, and constantly reminding myself that the people that I'm trying to help may very well be uncomfortable and scared about the road ahead. How do you spell empathy and humility? P-E-T-E. I'm pretty proud of how humble I am as well. Just ask me. It's really, really cool. And then for all of us, it's getting over the fear of missing out or the fear of not being able to control the changes that need to happen by trusting small but diverse groups of people to co-create solutions on our behalf. How about that for a little kinship? These values can also be used to drive conversation realignment when we see behaviors that don't jive with them. Hear a leader say, hey, I know what's best for the customer in my business, just go build it. It's likely that they're lacking some humility, empathy, and trust. Seeing teams spread across multiple top priority items with none of them making the progress that you'd hope for. How can you narrow the focus of their work so they can get things done all the way through to done? Experiencing weeks of meetings talking about the same thing while nothing changes. What's the smallest experiment you can stand up immediately in order to learn and in order to demonstrate that bias toward action? Seeing people attempting to just add more resources to a project to increase speed, they're likely struggling to empathize with the human team and failing to be curious about other ways to improve performance. I liken it to Google Maps. There are multiple ways to get to every destination. And so staying focused on the destination, trusting the process, and knowing that we can make micro adjustments along our map by using real-time data is really what it's all about. And so what's the practical impact of some of these things when we've got the values, we've got some behaviors that we want to consider, how can they actually drive results? Basically, these types of behaviors and rooted in easily understood values can result in truly remarkable outcomes. Let's take a look at the Fortune 50 retailer I used to work for. Over a 4-year period, we accomplished twice the work with about 1/3 fewer team members. We increased employee engagement, we improved system stability, and we enabled the company's stock price to nearly double. It took thousands of people aligned around a single vision of success to achieve those outcomes. We made all kinds of mistakes along the way. We did our best to help really hard stuff feel a little less like loss for people and a lot more like collective gain. I fully believe that these results are repeatable which is why several coworkers and I moved to a Fortune 125 financial services firm where we're attempting to apply these same concepts within a new context. We're about 18 months in, and it's even harder the second time than it was the first. Here's my before and after photo to prove it. Perfectly sane looking individual before joining the bank, and the current me. Thank God my wife loves me. I started growing this luscious beard as a joke, saying that I'd shave it when we're done with transformation. The real joke is that transformation is never done. Therefore, I will be a Duck Dynasty star before it's all said and done. The beard reminds me that we're on a long road, that it's okay to be a little bit different, and that you should always think twice before you eat something with barbecue sauce on it. So it's also a reminder that transformation can and probably should impact every part of our lives. What started as a PowerPoint slide with 7 circles designed to help others shift their points of view regarding change has turned into something that is slowly transforming who I am as an individual and who I want to become. And it's not just at work. I'm extremely imperfect in every role that I play, as a leader, as a husband, as a father, and as an artist, which is where personal transformation comes in. This is my wife, Trish, and I on our wedding day over 20 years ago. We dated for a few years, took a break, thank Ross and Rachel from Friends, got back together and got married. We weren't aligned by a set of core values. I honestly believe we might have killed one another before our first anniversary. She was absolutely obstinate and incredibly emotional, and I'm pretty sure she thought I had some issues, but I wasn't listening at the time, so I have no idea what they were. In short, 2 people with best intentions and a lot of baggage. And regardless, we survived and procreated. This photo was taken on May 7th, 2002, 5 minutes after Jacob Boyd Anderson joined the world. Talk about transformation. This kid blew up my world for the better. I went from being an independent guy to a dad. I went from thinking about myself almost exclusively and realizing I was now part of something much bigger. My wife liked to note for this part of the presentation that I probably should have realized that when I got married as well, but so be it. I remember standing there 5 feet from the woman that gave birth to this miracle thinking I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. And there is no instruction booklet or way to control the world she had just brought our son into. This initial transformation took a ton of practice, perseverance, and patience. And we loved it so much we decided to do it again. When Emma G, my personal mini-me, came along, she completed the tightly held vision that Trish and I had shared for our family, even back before we got married in 1999. I would go as far to say that we had a full-on project plan and we fully intended on controlling every part of it. 1 dog, 2 kids. We're very specific about the number of kids. We committed to never being outnumbered, man-to-man defense at all times, never play zone. And we also knew that once the kids grew up and left us, we'd get me out of corporate America so I could return to creating art as soon as I could afford to do so. But all this values-based stuff has the potential to blow up your project plans. And we recently started walking the talk as a family and gave up control while leaning into a significant change that we absolutely cannot control. In September of 2019, our nuclear family officially grew by 1. Trish and I now have 3 teenagers, and we are officially outnumbered and feeling a little bit out of control. Victoria, affectionately known as Vic within our tribe, is extended family that grew up in a really rough set of circumstances. She needed a change, and we've chosen to help her as she navigates her own personal transformation. We recognize that we can't force or control that change, and we recognize that this activity impacts our whole family. It changes roles, it changes our North Star a bit, and it's simultaneously filled with joy and pain. And there's no instruction guide for this one either. Our in-flight transformation isn't a whole lot different than the corporate ones I've described. In order to succeed, we have to align around a set of values we can all buy into and use as a filter to understand our progress. We need to give each other grace to fail. We have to celebrate the unique gifts that each of us bring. We need to be resilient when, not if, the unexpected arises. And we have to celebrate the little wins we have along the way. And we have to play the long game. We all have to pursue a vision that is larger than ourselves. And it's insanely difficult work and absolutely worth it. So whether it's art or work or family, my heart's desire is that you leave this talk wanting to tackle something that is too big for you to control on your own. that you're inspired to establish, explore, and live by your own set of values, and that you leave wanting to hone your craft a little further, regardless of what that craft may be. I also hope you recognize that all of your experiences, personal and professional, painful and fulfilling, can ultimately be weaved together to help you accomplish things you never thought possible, all while being beyond your immediate control. Thank you.
That was great.
Now you can.
Learned all kinds of things about you.
Yeah, there you go. Welcome to all of me.
Well, at this time, folks who are watching, if you have comments, in fact, Pete, how do you feel about just making everybody a panelist so that we can just all be here together? Is that better?
Love it. Love to see faces.
Yeah. So I'm promoting you all. There's Bill. Give us a second to get everybody in here.
Of course.
Okay, I think everybody should be here now. If you can, yeah, go ahead and turn on your camera like Gonzo did. Thank you, Mark, Annette. Oh, look, Annette's outside. It's great. Sweet. All right, so what feedback do we have for Pete or questions? You want to go ahead and raise your hand. There's a function down at the bottom.
Hey, Brittany, could you have Pete stop the sharing?
Oh, sure.
I think that'll allow us to see everybody.
Gotcha.
Annette's got something to say. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Annette.
Hey guys, hi. I thought this was great. Thank you so much for doing this. I loved the talk. I actually would love to get references for the different studies that you were mentioning.
Sure.
I liked that slide was graphic, and I think it was pretty effective, but I think depending on your intent, if you want people to be able to take some of that away, because I think it's really powerful information that you compiled there.
Yeah.
There might be a better way to communicate that. Like
sure.
I was regretting that I wasn't actively taking notes as you were speaking, but then I think like I don't normally take notes during a TED Talk either. So yeah.
And this one honestly is kind of the audience for this was supposed to be in April, and it was an audience that would not have been a bunch of corporate peers, right? It would have been a blend of basically all kinds of people, very few of which know anything about technology or anything that we do in a transformational world.
Yeah.
Which is part of the reason that I was exploring trying to combine so many different parts of who I am into the same theme. So it's not surprising to hear that ask or the feedback, and I've gotten similar feedback from others that are waist deep in transformation. Like they want it to be like, give me the next 5 steps of transformation.
Right.
Tell me about your kid. Like I could give a shit about your kid. But yeah, that's so thank you. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, and I loved the pottery. Fantastic.
Well, thank you.
I'm a potter too.
Awesome. Love it.
What about you, Mark?
Hey, Pete, I thought that was great, how you wove your personal story to, business takeaways and really anchored it on principles, which ultimately is, what I've also found to be the guide in life. So,
hey, Mark,
yeah.
I realized one thing would be nice since we're all together, since maybe not everyone knows each other. Maybe when someone speaks, they could say a few words, and we'll come back to you, Annette, for that. And Mark, could you just say a few words about what you do?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. My title is Senior Vice President of Digital Technology and Experience in E-commerce at PepsiCo, which is a role I took on a year ago. It's got a lot of digital transformation sort of baked in there, not as ambitious or as far-reaching as the scope that you described, Pete, but I can definitely relate to a lot of the elements and the hearts and minds, and just you're in an uncharted land and you're trying to point out new potential pathways, which can be scary or threatening to people, and how do you help them along? So yeah, it was very resonant in that regard. Is that what you were hoping, Phil, for me to mention?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
What one thing to consider, and I realize you made a creative choice on this, so I may be opposing the creative choice, but my sister is also a potter, for what it's worth, and I found the beginning part of your talk very anchoring and helpful as a model. But what I think the audience may benefit from is more pictures illustrating what you're talking about. So you show your piece initially, and then you talk about mud, and you talk about flopped pots, and you talk about the kiln. Yeah. And I realize it would like quintuple the number of images you are showing, but sure. But it may be anchoring for people to see what you mean by a flop pot. What does mud, and to really show that process of mud to this beautiful thing you have, I think actually might be helpful as an analogy to then anchor for later parts of your talk.
Yeah, what's funny is when I let my old website die, but on the site I had a process section that does exactly what you just described. So I know I have the images to do it, and the only reason I didn't do it this time is I wanted to see if I got that same feedback, because the last time I gave the talk, somebody gave the exact same ask. So you have now validated the request, and now it will be changed. So thank you.
Awesome. You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Who's next?
Smiley Rodriguez guy. I miss seeing your mug, man.
What's up, Pete? It's so good to be here. It was a great talk. I really enjoyed, you've got some really specific points of humor that I thought played really well into your narrative. So that was great. The one just kind
Michael, just say a few words about yourself so everyone
knows. Oh,
knows.
yeah. Sorry about that, Phil. Hey, Mike Rodriguez. I run a product for a smaller startup called House Canary. We do real estate analytics and consumer experiences for lenders. We're in Boulder, San Francisco, and San Antonio. The one thing that I thought was great was really kind of diving into the principles. So much of the mechanics is so well documented, and people think about it in a way that is really, well, A plus B equals C in the way that we kind of push this transformation. And I don't think you could talk about that enough. I just think there's an incredible depth of understanding there that you have in the way that people are motivated, or the type of people that have been successful and maybe exhibit some of those principles. And just a really key learning for me there. So thanks for that.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
It's great. Hey, Pete, I'm gonna just share a few thoughts with you.
Yeah, please do.
Because I'm gonna have to leave a little early because we have a peer coaching call that I want to run to. But first, and I'm Phil. I think most people know me here at Collaborative Gain. But great work, really.
Thank you.
And I think it makes so much of a difference, echoing what everyone else has said, to bring your humanity into this, bring your person into this, bring your life experience into this, is absolutely fundamental, and certainly is absolutely fundamental in change, right? Change is so hard, and people, like your patients persevere. My experience with change in the 80s, I was marching with Reverend Al Sharpton in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, against police brutality and the murder of young Black men. And there were 300 of us, and there were a lot of white people, a lot of neighborhoods, people on the sidewalks throwing stuff at us, right? The New York Times did not cover it. It was hostile. And the only papers that covered it were the African-American press, the Amsterdam News, the Chicago Defender, which most people who aren't African-American don't even know exist, right? And, but here we are, 31 years later, and there's still, in some ways you could look at it and say, nothing's changed. And in some important ways, that's true. But there's not 300 of us anymore marching, and they're not throwing, tomatoes and canned goods at us and stuff. They literally getting hurt. At least the citizens aren't. Sometimes the police are doing things. And that's 31 years. Now, in the scope of human history, that's not very much time. But in the scope of a human life, it feels like really long, and a lot of people get demoralized along the way. Right. And whether we're talking about racism or we're talking about the kind of change you're talking about inside companies, the dynamics of change are not different. So I thought it was terrific. The one suggestion I might say, and it might mean that it's not for this presentation, it's for someone else, some other presentation, is you talked about your childhood and how that impacted your ability to trust,
Yep.
and how you were a skeptic and
Yep.
how you are a skeptic.
Yep.
It seems to me it might be helpful to add a little bit about, it seems to me you're not the 4-year-old or whatever age you were, the 6-year-old anymore, right? It seems to me you've learned something about trust and something about helping other people. So what have you learned about going from not trusting to being more trusting and helping other people do that?
Yeah.
And helping other people, like, not be immediately skeptical. Like, what if you assumed good intentions until proved otherwise, right?
Yeah.
And I assume you've learned stuff about that. So I was just thinking, man, I'd love to hear a little bit about that. Like, that might be helpful to me and the audience. So.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah. Great work, though, really.
I love the concept of kind of going full circle on those things.
Yeah.
And I probably haven't learned as much as I should have between the time I was 5 and the time I am now, but I won't.
Well, you and I need to have a separate conversation.
Yeah.
And because my family totally fell apart when I was a kid, and I've done 30 years of therapy, and I am a trusting person, but I've had to work my ass off to get to that.
Yeah. Good on you, man. I know it's hard work.
Yeah. I'd love to support you to do more in that vein, Pete. It's great. I think it's really important what you're doing. Cool.
I'm gonna embarrass the crap out of one of my team members because I see Heather is on the phone too. I forwarded it without asking anybody if I should or could or whatever, but she couldn't see it when I presented it internally. So Heather, I'd love to hear from you too. And everybody, the Scrum Master, Heather, who's not sharing her video.
Welcome, Heather. Now she is sharing her video.
There she is.
Yeah, because I'm on my phone. Thank you. Yes, I'm embarrassed, Pete. So thank you for throwing me on the spot. You know how much I love that. You guys want to talk about trust and how we've gained that? There we go. No, I really appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, I should introduce myself first. So I'm Heather Woodson-Irvin. I'm a Scrum Master at US Bank. I actually report to Pete, but I don't feel that way.
Good.
So I'm learning a lot though about product mindsets and working through these things with a different way of looking. The bank is a whole awesome new nut to crack, so that's been really a lot of fun there. I got a lot out of this. I was thinking as a visual learner, like I am, that the slides, like when you get into the more like listing of different things that you're thinking about, like at the beginning you had that pottery up for a long time, but you were having you had this whole list of things that you were going through, and I was having a little trouble following that. I think like I get, as a art history major, I understand like throwing pottery and everything like that, but some of the details you were getting into there might have been a little bit more illustrated that way. And then just like the carrying some of the themes through, like we're talking about those principles that you kind of found like maybe like got destroyed kind of for you at the beginning of your life, like early on, and then you built them back up. And I like how you brought that home at the end, but I think really like punching that message like right at the end as you're like leaving everybody is just like, that's like, because I know there's process and things that have come over from the previous company into this one, but like it's really about those principles and less of the process, because we could do whatever we wanted to. We could still do waterfall, and then we could end up in the same thing potentially if we were following the same principles and guiding lines to try to get us there. So
sure. Cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks for putting me on the spot.
You can smack me whenever we're allowed to be near each other again. It's all good.
Yeah, next year I will. Don't worry.
Hey, Pete, do you mind if I call on another person I know who's done a lot of transformational change?
Please do.
Sachel, can I cold call you? Are you able to?
She's raising her hand, actually.
Of course.
Oh, she's raising her hand. Oh, even better. Fabulous.
Yeah. So Pete, Sachel Watson, that was a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have been working on digital transformation. I manage the digital channels on the commercial banking side for Wells Fargo. And I feel like we need our own support group. It would be so great to kind of, hold hands at some point and do some, lessons learned.
what I was going to say is that I liked what everybody else said in terms of you bringing your kind of personal story into it. The time of your presentation, it's short, right? And for somebody who, you know, has worked in digital transformation, you know, I understand the whole, like, finance does this, HR does that. You need to do this with digital. You need to do that with data. But that'll kind of go over a lot of people's heads if they haven't been hands-on in transformation. So you may want to talk about the tenets of transformation just a little bit more. And then if you do that, then time is going to be spent there. And so maybe on your advice, if you could just take like one or two, as opposed to, you know, all the different advice you gave around, you know, focus and trust and kinship, etc. Like, just take one even and go deeper into that one. And yeah, I mean, as Phil said, this may be a different presentation as opposed to this one, because that seems like a change. But what I left hungry to find out more as a practitioner was, if you just took the idea of trust or kinship or focus into finance, into HR, into process, you know, into the road mapping and into the whatever, right? How would you, like, what did you do first that you thought was good? You know, what was the recipe you started from? And then after you applied this new principle, how did that impact the end result? Like, what was your aha moment?
Sure.
Because, you know, for a lot of us, I think we think we're doing it right. And other people are doing it wrong, right? So especially when something is about the attitude, right? Not something concrete like trust, you think like, oh yeah, you know, trust, we're a trusting team. And you don't really realize what the other person is saying, because you could be 10 times better than my team in doing this. And I want to know how, right?
Yep. No, it's cool that as I was trying to build the talk, you explore all these things and try to figure out what to share, what not to share, and so on and so forth. And I'm actually, the thing that I'm trying to work toward is doing basically a small book of some sort that actually does what you've described, but just take the time to go through each of them and say, you know, how do these things translate? And so doing a chapter or so on every one of them in a hour-long type of read or something like that is kind of the ultimate goal that I have, for at least for the value stuff, because at this point it's had a lot of eyes, a lot of generous people have put eyes on it, and I've got Jeff Patton weighed in on some of the stuff and changed some things with me. I mentioned the other name that that's now escaping me, as far as the other collaborative gain person that reached out when she saw the title and we started talking, and literally I've changed the set of values over the last 5 years because of just ongoing learning. I replaced kinship, used to just be have fun, but it wasn't strong enough by itself. Like there was something else to that, and the kinship thing, like, to me, just absolutely resonates because it emphasizes team. A lot of those things are like individual or personal values as opposed to team-based values. And so I loved the fact that when we talked through it, that popped up. So long-winded answer to say, yeah, I have no idea how to do that in 18 minutes as far as what you just described. Absolutely aware that some of the stuff is probably going to go over people's heads. And I'm trying to skim it enough that they get the basics of, hey, you're making a really big ass change at a company. And even if you don't understand all of the detail, you understand that you're asking people to change the way that they work and change things that they're comfortable with every day of their life. And I'm hoping that people can draw parallels with that, just the concept of having to do things that you've just absolutely gotten used to doing and you can do on autopilot. Proactive learning is not a common thing for a lot of people. Once they get into their checklist world, they shut off their brains. And so it's, to me, that's the thing I'm trying to get people to awaken to, is that like all this stuff is just about a growth mindset and what can I do above and beyond what I already know. But I really, really appreciate the feedback. It's all very, very valid. And I would love to join a support group with you on doing this stuff, especially at a bank, man. I think we're masochists because banks are about 1800-ish as they get.
So we have a to-do. We're now gonna set up a roundtable, the digital transformation roundtable. I'm guessing many of the people on this call would like to be a part of that. So we'll follow up separately. And then Pete, what did you think about Seychel's thought that maybe you focus on one or two key tenets?
Yeah, you know, I really,
yeah.
I mean, I've gone back and forth, honestly. I guess I think it's perfectly legitimate observation, right? It's like, how do you deep dive? And then the thing that concerns me, if I deep dive on one or two and don't touch on any of the others in any detail, then you'll have somebody that well, what does that other one mean? You're never going to satisfy everybody. And so I think my intent is to make sure that people understand the spirit of humility, and then the two groups of kind of head and heart and delivery centric stuff. And if they can get that at a high level, and then perfect world, big dream picture of having some type of a book or resource that supports the content as something that they can go grab afterward. If I can make people curious enough about the stuff to actually want to read about it, to me, that's your ticket to actually being able to provide something like that. But,
yeah.
Can I jump in here? Hey, Pete, thanks very much. I'm Tim Kieschnick. I lead a change acceleration team at Kaiser Permanente.
Nice.
And I really focused in on the values pieces of it. And there's a lot in there that I've been talking about. You know, I talk a lot about empathy, curiosity, humility. And what I find is nobody ever disagrees with these values. Everybody thinks they already have the values. It's not you don't have to say, oh, you need to value, trust is important. Nobody ever argues with that. Problem that I encounter is everybody thinks they're already great at all of these pieces.
Yep.
So as I'm hearing you talking about, is there one to focus in? I'm wondering, since you've got humility at the center, I wonder if there might be a take where you could say the core piece of humility that a leader needs in the transformation space is to be humble enough to recognize that I may not be creating the atmosphere of trust that I thought I was. I may not be as curious as I think I am. Humility might be just, if you lean into that, be humble about how well your behaviors and your systems are exhibiting these values.
You're giving me goosebumps.
That might be where to go.
You just, I mean, to me, you just tied together both things, right? So Seychel's approach on deep dive into one, and humility is bigger on the screen for a reason, and that is the one that's dead center as far as I'm concerned. And so if you even applying humility to all of the other values, I love that. I think that's actually a really viable way to still keep the duration about the same, but really, really challenge people to say, because you're right, nobody ever looks at these things and says, oh, those are horrible values. What are you, a jerk?
Exactly.
That's right.
So, but they also have difficulty translating them to what the behaviors are. And that's when I talk about writing something about this, to me, that's what that's all about, is how do I translate these values into, what's the top tier, what's the frozen middle, and what's the individual contributor supposed to do, and how are they supposed to behave theoretically if they were operating by these sets of values.
And for a leader, it's this combination of words and what do you say, and then the actions, what do you do, but then it's also how do you bake some of these things into your system. So how do you bake curiosity into your data systems? There are ways to handle data where you've eliminated the curiosity from your data system, which you have to really work to do that, but it can be done.
Hashtag life goals. Love it. No, you just I love that feedback.
Great.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
But Gonzo also has his hand raised. What you got, Gonzo?
He's just dancing.
Hey, Pete.
Hey,
Michael. Good to see you. I got a couple of things. Mostly, because I'm just starting my own transformation at work, merging these two teams. So I wanted focus a little more on some thoughts on how the presentation. There was at the beginning. There was a moment I wrote down, I need a personal story. And you came in, right? I mean, like within 30 seconds of that, you jumped into that. And I don't know if that means you need to start it a little tiny bit earlier or that it was perfect, because I wrote it down and then you started a personal story. So it worked for me, but
sure.
I noted it. slow down, edit, you edit, and I have some thoughts on how to compress it a little bit.
Yeah.
But build in intentional pauses. Give your audience an opportunity to absorb what you just said. And that'll help you too, because it'll give you a moment. Like, one of the things I didn't get to see that we see in council meetings all the time is you reacting to what you're saying and the personality coming out of that. I know you were focused on getting getting it out and hearing feedback, but give yourself that pause so you can be more personal about the stories, because they're heartfelt. Know your audience. I know the audience is going to be different. Dukes of Hazzard might be a little old. I know it, but Duck Dynasty and barbecue sauce, not too old. I think, know your audience.
I've never let go of Dukes, man. If they don't know who it is, go look it up. They can
I
Google
know, but
well,
we did have Daisy Dukes for a while. So the 200 and the 335%, 200 went up and 35% went down. I really think that arrow next to them, just because when I went back and looked at it as you kept talking, I was like, oh, now they look the same. Just a tiny thing. Regarding how to compress to give you that space, there were two stories that I thought were most compelling. One was the pottery bit, and I agree with everybody that more visual imagery with that, and the story about your own childhood and how it ties to your new adopted daughter, and the change those two experiences brought to your life that you've had to adapt to. And I think simplifying the stories, like, I love the pictures of you and your wife and the story about your beard, but I think they distract from a narrative. And I think the strongest narratives are your personal story as a child to adding a third child to your family, and how families change and grow and how you have to adapt to that. The word growth mindset, when you said it, I was like, why wasn't that in the presentation? So I don't know where it goes, but just the thought of it, just the idea that it grows to mirror what Tim was saying, I think that's really important. And okay, that's it.
Dude, thank you. That's gold.
If I think of anything else, I'll email you.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.
Yeah, have a great day.
I'm glad we're on the same council. I miss you.
Hey, this is Tim. I have one more kind of in the stylistic vein, since you're asking. So I, just before COVID struck, I went to a retreat on meditation, mindfulness meditation and voice. So I'm a musician, and I was, each of us got up and did some different singing things. And the big feedback that I got when I was singing was, they said, you look like you're not sure we really should be listening to you. Like you're afraid to take up the space. And I had the impression that you weren't quite sure that you belonged here, and you weren't quite sure that it was worth our time to hear the pottery piece. So you were kind of like, so here's this thing, and my advice is, man, you got great stuff. Just say, I've got this great stuff for you. I've got some fantastic, because you're clearly excited about it. You clearly have a lot of passion. And I don't know how much of it is the Zoom format, how much is that you're trying it out here, but it felt like you were really reining yourself in. Yeah. And it's clear there's a lot more there than what we were getting. And I want the rest.
Sure. Thank you. No, that's cool. And honestly, like, the first time I went through this, I was a friggin' mess. Like, I barely made it through the friggin' thing. I mean, at the end of the process, because it's the first time I had practiced it and so on, but there's something about sharing the stuff that I was sharing to a bunch of other human beings. And I was doing it for probably 30 people on my team, some direct reports, some others. I don't think there was too much above me, but just a lot of people. And you're doing it in a work setting where they may or may not know anything about you. And I swear they were all just ready to hug me at the end, as opposed to give me any feedback on the content, because it was just overwhelming stuff for me. So I'm now at a spot where that I'm trying to figure out how to let that emotion get just beyond the surface, but not derail my ability to actually speak. And so you saw that probably with the Victoria part of it, where it's that one, I glaze over. It just keeps on getting me. So, but yeah, I really appreciate that. And it's funny because I actually use that same language with my son on, like, you deserve the space that you take up in the room. Like fill it, because you're worthy of that. So I love that type of point of view. And a lot of it for me right now is that it is not anywhere near memorized, and it needs to be. And I'm not used to doing scripted stuff. I'm used to just doing, here's a slide, I riff on it for 45 seconds and go on to the next slide. And so I've got to figure out some way to get closer to that and not get married to the script. And that's why.
Let's set up some time and talk about, there's a book called Audition by a guy named Michael Shurtleff that's really important to young actors and how to approach the business. And let's connect, because there are things in there about how to present and about approaching auditions that I think are really relevant to where you are right now.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, man. I will definitely take you up on that.
Sweet. Pete, I don't know if this is helpful at all, but one of the things that I have always been drawn to you for, right, is that humor, because it's not the type of humor that you block people from having an experience with you. It's an invitation. And again, for what it's worth, that's one of the ways that you and I have always connected, and it's an easy access point, I think, for particularly strangers. But it is that balance between, you are telling some serious stories, like this is some deep stuff. So how do you balance between the humor and going deep? And maybe that's just how you get in there to then drop down into the deeper stuff. Just as
yeah, thank you, appreciate it.
It's just one of those ways that you do fill the room. So I'm not the only one, I think, that's had that experience of you amongst the councils.
Thank you. I can see I'm clearing the room.
No, we've had a lot of folks say, gotta go to the next Zoom thing.
I gotta go feed 3 kids. See you later.
There you go. Great to see you. Thanks for setting this up, Brittany. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
Thanks very much.
Yep. Thank you, Tim. Take care.
Thanks all. Bye.